Now on Colorado's Morning News, mental health, a serious issue confronting the men and women who protect and serve our communities. A new report from former Denver police officer Steve Warneke says for the third year in a row, police suicide at an all-time high across the country. 38% of officers dealing with depression. Right now, we're talking live with former police officer Steve Warneke about this issue. Thank you, Steve, for joining us.
Marty, Ed, thanks very much for having me on KOA.
You know, obviously, I know what you do or what you did for a living and what your colleagues do. It's a high-stress kind of job. But why do you think the suicide rate is higher now than, say, maybe even a decade ago or a couple of years ago?
So what I think is happening in the research that we did, we just found some really intriguing things, that 38% of cops were suffering from depression. We actually found out of the over 1,000 officers that we surveyed that 53% of them said that they cannot talk with issues about family. We had 49% say they don't feel like they can talk with their issues about coworker or talk, regarding their issues with their coworkers either. And then whether or not their perception of this reality is actually true or not, 93% of them said people don't understand the job of the police. The media, 88% is against the police. And what I think that's doing is just there's the stigma surrounding mental health also, so you can't speak out. And you look at this in a totality of the circumstances, and I think it's just driving police into isolation a little bit, because who is it you're going to talk to about these atrocities that you're seeing every day? And having done the job for 15 years there in Denver, it's my mission now to reduce police suicides, to increase the quality of life of police officers. And I think a subsequent thing that's accomplished by the work that we're doing here is to restore some understanding amongst the community.
Yeah, this is a fascinating study that you've got here. Another startling statistic, as you were listing them, 68% of the cops more anxious since becoming an officer. That makes me anxious. Should I be?
No, it doesn't. I don't think this translates to use of force issues. I mean, I don't think I think the police are still making good decisions. And now, having been gone 4 years, and I've worked through, this study was about law enforcement distress syndrome, which is a psychological thing that I observed in police officers. And I think it develops after a prolonged exposure to continuous threat, to witnessing violence, trauma, crime, accidents every day. I mean, guys, if all you did every day was go to everybody you talked to, their house had been burglarized, their car had been stolen, they'd be sexually assaulted, shot, stabbed, robbed, beaten, impersonated, stalked. If that, and then the other people you talked to were involved in accidents, right? They were hit by a car while they were going to the store. It just is, like you have to be able to do something with that. And when you combine all these things together, I think that it's not affecting the decision of police, because I look back 4 years now after working through a lot of these issues of law enforcement distress syndrome myself, and I still look back and go, well, we did the right thing. I mean, that's not the issue here. The issue is police not being able to, talk about this and then end up taking their own lives. That's where this is headed.
Okay, Steve. So are they not obviously maybe talking to professionals, but I would think they would talk to fellow colleagues. Like if you have a friend you can confide in and talk about because to your point, a lot of people don't understand what policing is like, what your job is, but a fellow colleague would. Are they not having those conversations within their own department, within their own ranks?
When I left the job, I wrote this book, From Boy to Blue, and I talk about this specifically. Police departments and police officers are specifically harsh on each other. And I remember very clearly in the academy being told, the reason that we're doing this is because you need to be tough, so that if you can't take it in here, how are you going to take it on the streets? Now, I think those lines have softened a little bit. And, just as we see similarly in the evolution of culture, people are just more in touch with feelings and more willing to talk about them. But I think what's happening is, police officers, for most of my career, I was in a car 10 hours a day by myself, so you're out there, you're alone anyway in the car, you're seeing your coworkers on other calls, but you're busy and you're alone a lot of the time. And it's just not an environment that's been conducive to disclosing personal and, vulnerable things about yourself.
Right. And Steve, as a former police officer and those going into the service, does this surprise them, or are they well aware of the dangers?
Well, if I could wave a wand right now, I think awareness is the key to this, because if we could teach people this in the academy, or even if you've graduated in academy, you can read this now. I think people that are suffering tend to look for ways to make that better anyway. I mean, my darkest times in my life were times where I was seeking out counseling or spirituality or other practices like meditation to make it better. And so I think that this isn't to dissuade people, but it's to say, you need to be aware of this thing, because I have cops that I still talk to, obviously, a lot of good friends and stuff. And I've pointed stuff out, some of these symptoms, and they say, oh, I never really noticed that till you pointed it out,
Right.
especially after they leave. So if police officers can say, oh, I remember, I know what's happening to me. That's that thing. And now what do I do about it? A lot of it can be self-correction, because a lot of times we find ways, hey, I don't like what's happening here, so I'm going to find a way to make it better. And that's really what I'm trying to do here. So it doesn't dissuade anybody. It's like, recognize what's happening and let's start taking steps to make it better.
And Stephen, I realize, and you're right, you're talking about policing as a separate issue than the mental health issue for officers, but I have to wonder, don't you think if the mental health of the officers is better, this is good for better policing down the line? If you're dealing with police officers who are feeling these tendencies and these moments of depression and anxiousness, they'll be better officers, better to serve the community if they can talk about this and be open. I would think departments would want that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a valid point. Listen, I mean, police officers have a reputation for being gruff, just
Right.
grunting, oftentimes not explaining things. People are like, that cop was a jerk, right? So there's a little bit of that. And I think maybe, definitely, I'm not going to disagree with you that if you're happy in your everyday life, that's obviously going to translate, into maybe a better interaction with the public.
Law enforcement distress syndrome, it is real. And Steve, you're releasing the full report on your website. Give us that.
Yeah, it's a 31-page report. It's at www.stevewarneke.com. There's all kinds of stuff there. There's videos also. And really, just if this message is resonating with you or a family member, I had a lot of people write and say, you put words to what I'm feeling. Thank you so much. And one guy said, I feel better just reading this. So the fact that I'm helping people now and still able to give back after
Right.
leaving the police force is really what I'm trying to do. So get this message out to the loved ones and to the police officers that are doing that important job.
Well, glad you were here to do that with us this morning, Steve.
Thanks, Marty. Ed. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
KOA News Radio time is 9:19. You're in Colorado's Morning News.